The moment Choi saw her, his hand froze. The crystal glass trembled in his grip, as if it already sensed what was coming. Serena stood at the center of the gala, calm, uninvited, unforgettable. Draped in midnight silk, she didn't just walk into the room, she reclaimed it. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not at his triumph. Not in the polished, legitimate world he built by stepping over her. "Darling, who is that woman?" his new wife whispered, diamonds tightening around his sleeve. "Nobody," Choi muttered too quickly. "Just a ghost from a past life." But Serena wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the men around him, the ones who had just toasted his success. The subtle nods. The hands hovering near their jackets. The smiles that no longer belonged to loyal allies. As cameras flashed and phones rose, Serena leaned in, her lips inches from his ear. She didn't shout. She didn't cause a scene. She warned him. And in that frozen second, with the world watching, Choi realized the truth. The woman he erased was the only one who could see how his empire was about to collapse. Stay with us till the very end to see what happened next. Because what Choi did after that warning shocked everyone. And if you enjoy powerful, cinematic stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. The neon pulse of the Myeongdong district in 2018 felt less like a city and more like a fever dream. Back then, Choi wasn't wearing $10,000 silk. He was wearing the sweat of a man who knew he was being hunted. They were tucked away in a dimly lit safe house that smelled of old gunpowder and cheap rain, the kind of place where legacies are either born or buried in the floorboards. Serena sat at a scarred wooden table, her eyes reflecting the erratic flicker of half a dozen surveillance monitors. She wasn't just his wife, she was the architect of his survival. While Choi's men relied on the blunt force of their fists, Serena saw the city as a series of interlocking gears. She could predict a betrayal 3 blocks before a gun was even drawn. "They're not coming through the front, Choi," she murmured, her fingers dancing over a tablet as she rerouted the building's power. "They've bribed the super. They're coming through the elevator shaft at 2 a.m. Choi checked the magazine of his pistol, his jaw tight with a mixture of adrenaline and awe. He looked at Serena, her natural hair haloed by the blue light of the screens, her calm a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. She was his secret weapon, the street-smart intuition that turned a mid-level thug into a rising king. When the doors finally hissed open and the first shadow stepped out, it was Serena's tactical trap that ended the fight before it truly began. She didn't flinch as the muzzle flashes lit the room. She simply watched the data points, ensuring every threat was neutralized. In the adrenaline-soaked silence that followed, Choi pulled her into his arms, tasting the salt of her skin and the copper of the air. For a moment, they were an untouchable unit, a power couple forged in the fire of the dirty days. But as he looked at her, a cold, different kind of calculation began to take root in his mind. He was looking toward the future, toward the glass towers of the global CEO he intended to become. He began to wonder if a black American woman who knew where all the bodies were buried could ever fit into the polished, monochromatic world of Seoul's high society. He loved her brilliance, but he was already starting to fear her outsider's status. As she leaned her head against his shoulder, finally letting out a breath of relief, she had no idea that the man she had just saved was already mentally editing her out of the next chapter of his story. The transition from the blood-stained alleys to the sterile, white-walled penthouse in Apgujeong happened faster than the seasons changed. By 2022, Choi's suits were no longer rumpled from safe-house scuffles. They were razor-sharp, custom-cut to project an image of absolute corporate legitimacy. The air in their home, once filled with the warmth of shared secrets and late-night strategy, had grown thin and frigid. Serena noticed it first in the way he stopped looking at her eyes and started looking at her as if she were a smudge on a polished lens. The evening he finally broke the silence, the sunset over the Han River was a violent, bruising purple. Choi didn't greet her. He simply placed a heavy manila folder on the marble kitchen island. The Shadow Queen didn't need to open it to know what it was. Her tactical mind had seen this move coming from 3 months away, but her heart had refused to believe the data. "It's time, Serena," Choi said, his voice stripped of the gravelly affection that had once been her anchor. He stood with his back to her, staring at his own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass. "The board is finalized. The merger with the Shinil Group is contingent on a specific image. One of stability. One of tradition." Serena's hand hovered over the folder. "Tradition? Is that what we're calling it now, Choi? After I rebuilt your security from the ground up? After I handled the hitmen you couldn't outrun?" He turned then, and the man who had once looked at her with awe was gone, replaced by a stranger with obsidian eyes. You were a necessity for the climb, but you are a distraction to the summit. Your presence, it invites questions I don't want to answer. You're an outsider, Serena. You don't fit the brand I'm building. He slid a second document toward her, a non-disclosure agreement with a payout that could buy a small island. It was the price of her silence, the cost of erasing the architect of his empire. Take the money. Go back to America. Live a life where you don't have to look over your shoulder. You think you're buying my silence? She whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade she had ever deflected for him. But you're actually buying your own blindness. She signed the papers without a tear, her dignity a silent scream in the hollow room. 6 months later, Choi's wedding to a quiet, porcelain-skinned socialite from the Min family was the event of the year. He had found his perfect match, a woman who looked like a trophy on his arm and knew nothing of the blood beneath the floorboards. He believed he had finally achieved the perfect image, never realizing that by discarding his shadow, he had left himself standing in a light that revealed every target on his back. The digital world was the only place where Serena could still see Choi without the filters of his new, curated life. From a nondescript apartment in Brooklyn, she watched the data streams of his global logistics empire as if they were a familiar heartbeat. Her exit had been silent, but her curiosity remained loud. She had built the original encryption that shielded his operations, and she knew the backdoors that even Choi had forgotten existed. It was during a routine sweep of the redirected server traffic that she saw the anomaly, a ghost in the machine. Buried deep within the new legitimate architecture of the Shin-Il merger were layers of encrypted code that looked like standard accounting software but functioned as a digital ledger for international money laundering. Serena's fingers flew across the keys, her brow furrowing as she unraveled the knot. This wasn't Choi's work, it was too clumsy, too eager to leave a trail. She realized with a jolt of ice-cold clarity that the stable partners Choi had traded her for weren't just running a business alongside him, they were building a cage around him. The new board of directors was systematically funneling federal-grade contraband through Choi's shipping lanes, using his unique digital signature to authorize every transaction. They were setting the stage for a massive federal collapse, a fall so spectacular it would bury Choi under a mountain of life sentences while his partners walked away with the clean assets. Even his new wife's family was entangled in the strings, providing the political pressure to ensure the investigation would be swift and merciless. Choi was walking into a slaughterhouse, convinced he was entering a boardroom. Without her tactical oversight, he had become blind to the noise in the eyes of the people he now called friends. His arrogance had convinced him that because he had reached the summit, he no longer needed to watch for the cracks in the ice. Serena stared at the evidence glowing on her screen, the specific dates, the forged signatures, and the inevitable trap door. She had every reason to close her laptop and let the mountain swallow him whole. He had discarded her like a distraction, an outsider who didn't fit. But as she watched the countdown of the impending Series C funding, the final trigger for the trap, she realized that the only thing more powerful than her resentment was her inability to let a masterpiece she helped build be destroyed by amateurs. He didn't deserve her help, but the truth deserved to be told. The chandelier light at the Grand Hyatt Seoul felt like 1,000 needles against Choi's skin as he stood at the podium, the glass in his hand finally shattering under the pressure of his grip. The gala was supposed to be his coronation, but the silence that followed Serena's arrival was the sound of a guillotine blade sliding into place. She didn't cause a scene, she didn't need to. She simply moved through the crowd of dignitaries and journalists like a ghost returning to the site of its murder, stopping only when she was close enough to smell the expensive cologne he'd bought to cover the scent of his past. As the cameras of the international press hummed, Serena leaned in, her lips grazing the shell of his ear. The crowd froze, sensing a scandal, their phones rising in a synchronized wave of digital voyeurism. "Look at the man to your left, Choi," she whispered, her voice a silk thread through a maze. "The one holding the champagne for your new wife. He's not a waiter. He's a federal informant, and the ledger he's carrying in his pocket has your digital signature on every shipment of the Shin-Il contraband." Choi's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He tried to look at his new wife, Min-hee, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. She was busy adjusting her pearls, her expression as porcelain and cold as the day they married. "She knew Choi," Serena continued, her whisper growing sharper. "Her family didn't want a partner, they wanted a scapegoat. The Series C funding that cleared 10 minutes ago was the final signature on your arrest warrant. They've already leaked the laundry logs to the prosecution." A cold sweat broke across Choi's brow as he looked out at the sea of faces. The people he thought were his peers were now just spectators at a public execution. Every person behind a glowing screen was waiting for the moment the Iron King broke, their lenses focused on his wide-eyed realization of total defeat. He had traded the only woman who would have died for him for a world that was currently filming his downfall for likes and headlines. Serena stepped back, her face a mask of regal indifference, leaving him alone under the blinding spotlights. The trap wasn't just closed, it was being broadcast to the world, and for the first time in his life, the man who owned the city had nowhere left to hide. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom groaned open, not for more guests, but for the arrival of the cold, hard reality Choi had spent years trying to outrun. The rhythmic thud of tactical boots echoed against the marble, a percussive death knell for his carefully constructed empire. Blue and red lights began to pulse against the high windows, staining the gold leaf of the ceiling with the colors of his impending ruin. As the first wave of federal agents moved through the crowd, his partners and rivals instinctively drew back, leaving Choi standing in an island of sudden, terrifying isolation. Serena turned toward the exit, her silk gown trailing behind her like a shadow reclaiming its independence. She moved with a grace that belonged to someone who had already found the door while the rest were trapped in the burning room. "Serena." Choi's voice broke, the sound raw and stripped of its practiced corporate authority. He stumbled off the podium, reaching out as if he could still grasp the hem of her protection. "Wait. You can fix this. You know the back doors. You know how to wipe the logs. Please. I'll give you anything. The company, the accounts, everything is yours if you just get me out of this." Serena stopped, but she didn't turn around immediately. She let the silence stretch until the clicking of cameras and the shouting of the press reached a fever pitch. When she finally looked back over her shoulder, her expression wasn't one of anger or even triumph. It was the chilling, hollow look of a stranger who owed him nothing. "I can't help you, Choi," she said, her voice carrying with a lethal, quiet clarity that bypassed the noise of the room. "The encryption is too complex for me to touch now. After all, I'm just an outsider, remember? A liability to the brand." The words hit him harder than the hand that finally clamped onto his shoulder. As the lead investigator stepped into the light, reciting the charges that Serena had already decoded in a Brooklyn apartment, Choi watched the only person who truly knew him walk out into the cool midnight air. He was the Iron King, surrounded by his kingdom of glass, but as the crowd surged forward with their phones held high to witness his arrest, he finally realized that he wasn't a king at all. He was just a man who had burned his only bridge while he was still standing on it. The last thing he saw before the world turned into a chaotic blur of flashbulbs and handcuffs was Serena's silhouette disappearing into the darkness, free, while he was left to be devoured by the consequences of his own betrayal. Moral lessons. The story of Serena and Choi highlights 5 critical moral lessons. Substance over brand. True power lies in the internal mechanics and talent of an organization, not just the polished image projected to the world. Loyalty is reciprocal. Treating a foundational partner as a disposable asset turns your greatest protector into your most dangerous threat. The outsider advantage. Those who don't fit the brand often possess the objective clarity to see traps that insiders are too arrogant to notice. Arrogance causes blindness. Success can create a false sense of security, leading to a fatal lack of vigilance. Integrity is unerasable. Legitimate empires cannot be built on stolen credit. The truth eventually demands a public reckoning.